Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. For today's Jataka, um, we are going to visit another story, this time with a familiar face um, that we see quite often um, in discourses. This happens to be the second week, by the way, of the Jataka series that we recently started. So there's so many lovely stories, messages here. In this case, we will be doing the Jataka 314, I think it was. And it is a story that involves King Pasenadi and a dream that he sees. It so happens, by the way, just to give you a background a little bit, King Pasenadi was the king, the ruler of one of the biggest, if not the biggest, kingdom within India, what we see today as India. But India was divided into so many different kingdoms, some small, some bigger, some than others. But the region was called Kosala. So he was known as the Kosalan king, King Pasenadi. He was the one who was married to Queen Mallika, who was a very devoted student of. She was a very generous person. She was the queen, so she had taken the Buddha as her teacher. So she would do so many different generous acts. And one of the things that people forget to consider is how she had been she had played a crucial role in bringing King Pasenadi to the Buddha in the first place, because King Pasenadi was very much well influenced by the Brahmins, and what that was always doing was, when you're a king and you're that powerful, the religious elite, the highest class of India, which are the Brahmins, the priests, who had such a big control over the king, in a sense, um, because it's all about ritual, incantations, chants, special hymns, and things that they had to chant. They all would make a king who is so powerful still feel that there are things that are outside of his control. And that's where priests come in to this day in the world and throughout history. So they had positioned themselves above the warrior class, which were the Khattiyas, the princely warrior class, or the rulership stratus, or the level or caste in Indian society. So anyhow, the story begins where, by the way, it's the name of the Jataka today is Lokakumbhi Jataka, which is the, I just wanted to double check because I want to post this later on, 314, like the pi, 3.14 pi. So, but minus the decimal point. So what happens is one day King Pasenadi is moving around his capital city on the back of an elephant, and he was a king. So he's riding the elephant, in his in his kingdom, in his capital. He's the king. He can do pretty much anything he wants. So he's in all his kingly regalia and things. So he's walking, he's riding the elephant. And as he's looking around, he sees a house. And from the house, there's I guess it's one of the rich mansions as he's passing by that neighborhood. And there's a veil, there's a window, there's a balcony, veranda, and a woman, a beautiful woman, steps out and looks, and she smiles and then pulls herself back in behind the veil. She's so pretty, she's so beautiful that King Pasenadi sees her and he's immediately struck by her beauty. He falls in love, or actually, he wants to have her. He's the king. Everything pretty much belongs to him. That's how the thinking is. So he gets to work and he's asking around, who is this woman? I want her. And soon enough, he finds out that it, happens to be a situation where he can't have her, meaning she belongs to someone else. She's married. Now, remember, King Pasenadi, as I was mentioning, was the husband of the queen, who happens to be Queen Malika. So he has a wife plus many other wives. That's how it used to be. To this day, some kings in the world have many, many wives. So, but he wants her because he's passionately now craving to have her because he was taken by her beauty. Because that's how the senses are, the eyes. We see something, all of a sudden we want to grab it. And we want more. It's called tanha in the Dhamma, in Buddhism. Tanha is the constant thirst for more. And this happens to be definitely a thirst, craving for more, because King Pasenadi now wants to have her by any means possible. Guess what he does? He finds out who the husband is, of course, and he arranges for the husband to go about 7 miles away to get him some lotuses and some mud to plant those lotuses in his own royal, I guess, courtyard, knowing full well that the gates of the city would be closing very soon. So no human being could be able to go 7 miles. In Buddhism, in the old texts, we have a measuring system, and they're called yojana. Yojana is about 7 miles long. So it's a yojana away. He knows this very well, but he's thinking, there's a lot of burglars, a lot of criminals, a lot of bad people outside the city gates. And he's going to be rushing to get me the lotuses, which I don't need, but hey, I want to put him to work. I want to exhaust him. I want him out of the picture. That's what King Pasenadi is doing. And the poor man ends up going and he's rushing. He knows that by the time he comes back, he's going to be locked outside the gates. Now, the gates would close for everyone. It didn't matter who it was. So there's no exceptions. And now the man goes and comes back with the lotuses in the mud, all dirty, and he's yelling, take me in, let me in. They're not. He can't. So he's stuck outside. Now he's worried about his health, of course, his life. He doesn't know whether he could survive the night, because remember, the gates would also protect the city and its occupants from wild animals, including Bengal tigers, elephants, wild boars, leopards. I've seen video footage, I remember a few years ago, of wild leopards tigers, basically, smaller size than the Bengal tigers, that were coming into the cities in India and killing people, taking people away. So this is 2,600 years prior. So there were far less people, more animals. And there are no street lights, street lamps. So you're on your own type of a thing. So some of the commentaries say that the man had to look for a way to find some type of a refuge. And he somehow found his way to the hermitage where Lord Buddha was in Savatthi. And so he had some refuge, he had some protection, but he was left outside. What's happening to my wife? What's happening to him? We don't know whether he had children, but probably they were newlyweds. But what happens that night to the king is very interesting, and this is why we have the sutta, or rather the Jataka story, right? The past lives of the Buddha. That night, the king is trying to sleep. Now remember, he is craving that woman. He's already having in his mind perhaps even vulgar thoughts about the woman who doesn't belong to him. He knows that. But he wants her. That's why he wants to get rid of the husband outside the city gates. Hopefully he's hoping the man doesn't survive the night. So he goes to sleep. And while he's sleeping, he hears these terrible, agonizing sounds of men, male voice, crying loud. They're so menacing, and he feels terrorized. And it's coming to him in the form of 4 syllables. Du, sa, na, so. It keeps ringing in his ears. He can't sleep a wink. So he spends the whole night terrified. Now, in the morning, when he wakes up, the way that the king would normally wake up in those days, the Brahmins of the priests of the court would come to greet the king, and they would say, "How are you, my king? How are you? You know, your Royal Highness Maharaja. We hope you've slept well. How was your sleep? Was it sweet? Was it this?" And so they give him blessings, this and that, so they can start the day. That's how they could also score some points, right? Some goodies they would get from the king. I mean, come on, he's the highest power in the land. So he turns to these people, these Brahmin priests of his, and he says, "What are you talking about? Good night's sleep. It was a nightmare. I didn't sleep a wink. I couldn't sleep. I'm terrorized. I'm terrified, in fact." And he said, why, king? What happened? And he says, "You're the priest. You should know." And they look at each other. They're like, "What? Could you tell us more details?" And he tells them about these 4 sounds, 4 crying, loud, piercing syllables that he heard of men crying. He tells them about du, sa, na, so. What does this mean? He says, "You're my priest. I pay you to know these things. You're the mantra guys, right?" Because that's what the Brahmins would do. Just give mantras. Oh, we have to chant this, and that's how we're going to get the rains coming, or that's how we're going to get rid of your enemies, and all that. So we have to say some mantras. So he says, "There's a mantra for you, 4-syllable mantra. What is this?" And he's still shaking because he's the king. He's supposed to know. He's supposed to have a handle on things. So he's very much anxious. restless, fearful as to what this means. And they look at each other, they scratch their heads, they're like, and they discuss amongst each other and they say, we know what this means. This is a special sign. But we have a cure for it. There's a terrible danger coming to you, to your life, to your kingdom, etc. So they start to create this fearful scenario for the king. And now he's all ears. He's like, yeah, where, when, how, what should I do? Tell me what I must do, and I will do it. And that's exactly what they wanted to hear. Because you got now this most powerful person on the land in your own grip. You got him. And he will do whatever they want him to do. And they say, this requires a special kind of sacrifice, Maharaja. To completely avoid this debacle, this dangerous situation, we have the cure for it. We know the perfect mantra, we know the perfect ritual, and you're going to have to do the fourfold sacrifice. Fourfold. This was a typical sacrifice, but it required royal patronage. Basically, 4 of this species, 4 of that species, 4 of that. We're talking about living beings. India was not, as today many people think, nonviolence and all that. But these are the Brahmins, and they were talking about animal sacrifices. The bigger, the better. In this case, they would start usually from the elephants. So to start with, you start from the top down. Elephants, 4 elephants had to be sacrificed. 4 horses had to be sacrificed. 4 bulls or oxen, buffalo. 4 humans. Yes, human sacrifices. This is India. All right. People don't talk about these things. People don't research this. And all the way down, like the goats, sheep, calves, baby cows, etc. Peacocks, chickens, fowls, birds, and things. And the king says, done. Go ahead and start. Now, usually when there is a sacrifice like this, there's also a lot of money pouring into the pockets of the Brahmins, the priests, which, if you know anything about human history in your social studies books, you probably also see how many times, the religious places also make a lot of money from these things. So back then, it was no different. In fact, they were the masters at this. So they now go outside and they're like rubbing their hands together. They're like, we got this. We are going to be eating such a good, delicious meals, delicious meats. We're going to be given special gifts because the king, in addition to the sacrifices, would give them new land, new mansions, clothing, jewelry, in some cases, women. Yes. And Brahmins, they were supposed to be living the ascetic life, celibate life. Many of them were not. So anyhow, they go outside, they're kind of celebrating. Queen Mallika sees this. She's the queen, she lives there. She sees this, and because she's a student of Lord Buddha, she doesn't have trust over these priests, these Brahmins. She's like, I wonder what these people are so kind of sneakily talking amongst themselves, almost like conniving, almost like, So she walks into the king's chambers, king's bedroom, and he says, my king, how are you today? And he goes, you don't care about me. Mallika, you're my queen. You don't pay attention to me. You don't really mean it when you say how you ask me how I'm doing. He says, what's going on? And what were the monks, the Brahmins doing here? I saw them walk away and they're like I feel suspicious about them. Like, what's going on? He says, don't worry about them. They have the cure for me. And he says, well, what are you talking about? What cure? What happened? So he tells her the dream. And Queen says, "Oh, I see you consulted those Brahmins, but have you consulted the chief of all Brahmins?" And he goes, "There's a chief? Who is the chief?" "Oh," she says, "Gautama the Buddha, my teacher, my teacher. You must go and consult with him immediately. These are not authorities in this matter. Such matters have to be addressed properly by an expert. These aren't experts. Gautama, the chief of Brahmins, is, however." So he's like, "Yes, let's go." So he gets his own chariot. He doesn't wait for the whole, kingly Maharaja procession to get ready with the elephants. He just gets on his chariot with his charioteer and heads out straight to Savathi's Anathapindika monastery, where the Buddha was residing at the time, which is not so far. It's still in Savatthi, so Kosala. Now the king goes and asks, obviously, even as a king, he had to bow to the Buddha and respectfully. And Lord Buddha asks him about his welfare. He says, "Maharaj, are you okay? Or is everything well? Are you healthy? Is your kingdom well?" And he starts saying, "Well, Bante, it's been terrible. It's been this, it's been that. I need help. And Mallika, my queen, who happens to be your student, informed me that you are the one to come to with this major problem of mine." And he tells the Buddha. So he says, "I have found a cure thanks to the Brahmins because they're going to be doing a sacrifice." And the Buddha says, "That won't be necessary. Your kingdom is not in danger, Maharaja." King hears this. "It's not?" He says, "No, you need to rest. You need to relax." He says, "This is not the first time that this has happened. Long time ago," he says, during King Brahmadatta's time of Varanasi, he had an encounter with a woman. He saw a woman. He doesn't say you did see one. The Buddha sees this. He knows what's happening. And he says about King Brahmadatta, who lived many eons earlier. He had noticed a woman and he had lust towards her. So he had lustful thoughts. So he wanted to have her sexually, this and that, even though it was not right for him. Now, guess who's sitting right there next to the Buddha, close to the king? That woman's husband who was left outside the gates, who survived the night. So he's sitting there close by. He's not saying, there's not a peep coming out of him. He's not saying a word, but he's sitting there. You can imagine what he must be feeling, of course. But the king is not saying anything about, "Yeah, yesterday I saw this woman," and the man doesn't presume that, "Oh yes, this has happened," but he just wants to play it, fair, as they say. So Lord Buddha starts telling how the king, also the Brahmadatta king, about whom Lord Buddha is reciting, this is where the Jataka part comes in. Jataka is the past lives of the Buddha. So this is the Jataka portion of the story. He says that night, King Brahmadatta, in the Jataka event, couldn't sleep because he heard also those same sounds. He says, "Do you know what those sounds are or were?" He says, "No, please tell me." Dusana so. They're not coming from the same person. They're coming from four separate entities, men. Well, now they're not men anymore because now they are in the hell realms, in the lowest of realms. There's many realms. We are on the fifth realm of existence as human beings. Dogs, cows, insects are on the level below us, animal realm. Devas are above us. So there's 31 levels of this. The bottom level is the hell realms, or are the hell realms, miserable realms. Niraya, sometimes they're called in Pali, Niraya. They're miserable places to be. So one of the worst places to be is described in the suttas as having molten like copper. And it takes a lot of heat, long time to make it, to melt it. So, and it's a big cauldron. It's like a big, giant container, receptacle in which there's hot liquid. It's so big. It takes 30,000 years for someone to come up from the bottom of that cauldron, gasping for air. It takes 30,000 years to come up and to gasp for air to the surface, like a bubble. When a bubble comes up when you're boiling? Next time when you're boiling something, when you're seeing something boil or boiling water, or even if it's like a carbonated water or milk, or not milk, soda, carbonated mineral drink, look at the bottom bubbles. They don't stay there, right? Eventually, they break away or they dislodge themselves from the surface of the glass or something, and then they go up. So calculate that by 30,000 years. That's how deep it is. And these four different men had landed in that part of hell. So one of them was coming up after 30,000 years. As he's trying to gasp for air, he was saying, due to my wicked way of living and lustful thoughts, by wanting to sleep with other men's wives, due to my wanting, craving to, despite all ethical, virtuous structures and rules, I nevertheless wanted to go ahead and get what I wanted. And because of that, I ended up in this hell. And I've been in this hell for, I cannot count how long. Oh, I wish I got another chance at being born a human. I would never engage in such a thing. That was the do part. Do sanaso, the syllables. Second one, he says, what you heard as su is actually sour, is this existence, which is anything but existence, this misery that I'm in. Sour. If you've ever tasted sour, it's like acid. Acid is like hydrochloric acid or anything acidic is sour tasting. Imagine pouring lemon or acid on an open wound. That's sour. That's painful. So the second man was every 30,000 years as he's climbing up the cauldron, like a bubble, he was saying, sour is this existence of mine. What have I done? What have I done by wanting to engage in sexual acts with people, with beings inappropriately? simply because I had the lustful thoughts. So I wanted to get it and I was going to get it no matter what. You see this around. People don't talk about these things. People, if you can think about it, if you can have it, if you have access to it, and if you want it, basically, you should have it. That's the society. Unfortunately, that's what we have. Sadly, there's this thing called porn addiction today. Everywhere, everywhere. Children are exposed to this. Teenagers, are exposed to this. Children, infants are exposed to this. All you have to do is just go have some internet connection and boom, they're downloading it. They're dumping it into people's homes. Parents have a very difficult time to put some type of measures because these individuals, these companies are sneakily finding ways, and children, if it's forbidden, as the human brain works, we want to find a way to get it, even if we don't know why, but others are talking about it, so we want some of that. So there's no responsibility. But the danger is so great, people are not talking about this. So here the Buddha is presenting where this will take you, even as a king, because it's not just for teenagers that this is happening. A king is having lustful thoughts to grab someone else's wife for his own pleasure. Now, whether she wants it or not also doesn't matter, but he is thinking about this. So he's already breaking sila, precepts. He wants to steal someone else's, what belongs to someone else, even though a woman or someone's wife is not someone's possession, but legally, ethically, they're joined together. They are saying to the world, we belong together. That's it. They are together. So in a sense, there is a possession, but not the way we think of objects. Of course, that's not the case. But you want to come in and break away that union. You're stealing something that doesn't belong to you. Simply because you can doesn't mean that you can or that you should. How do you measure this? Well, you must feel it on your skin, as they say. Imagine what would happen if someone came and took something that you consider to be yours. Would you enjoy that? Especially if it's someone you love, somebody coming in and stealing that person away from you. Well, that's what Pasenadi was doing. King Pasenadi was thinking about that. Hey, I can get away with it because I'm the king. I'm the king. Everyone belongs to me. Everything, whatever I want happens. Oh, yeah? Look at those 4 voices that came through the night. Couldn't let him sleep. The third one. Sa. Do, sa, na. So, right? Na means, he caught the glimpse of because as they're trying to say the word, the first syllable is getting out of their mouth and they're being pulled back down. Remember that. So the first one says, due to my lustful life, so he goes pulled down. This one is now, so it becomes no. Dusa no. So he's trying to say, now I see the debacle. Now I see the tragedy I put myself through for all these countless thousands of years. Why? Because I went after something that wasn't mine, was not given. We live in a world where people are saying, well, if you can get it, yeah, sure. You can outsmart a person and take what belongs to them. Sometimes we do that in broad daylight. Sometimes we see people doing that. We saw this happen for several years in places in the United States. People were coming into the store, stealing, taking stuff with clippers. I know people who have seen this in front of their eyes in stores in California where a person comes in and pulls out their uh, wire cutters and cuts women's bags, expensive, in a mall and places, and they would take it, and there's no one to come and stop them. People are shocked, like this isn't happening. There's cameras, and they're walking outside with the stuff that doesn't belong to them. Well, now I hope you're getting a glimpse as to where these people will end up at the bottom of that cauldron. Because this never belonged to them. Especially in the case of a human being where you want to steal that human being. Trying to charm your way, seduce. This is very dangerous. So the person says, now I see the harm I've caused. Not just to the person. We don't know the story as to what they have actually done, but basically, this is the context. So they were sexually lustful of someone, but we don't know what they did. Some of them might have done some terrible things, just like King Pasenadi was planning on killing the man, in a sense, to get his wife, because she would be available. So here comes the king with all his power, which is very seductive, right? For someone who doesn't have that. And then the last one, so. The Buddha says that was the call the person was making, the cry the person was making, as this, so long as I've been here, I've suffered so much, unimaginable pain. So much I long for being reborn as a human being again. And I will never do the things I've done in the past that got me here. Oh, when will that day come for me to be done with my errors? Just like we have punyas, or doing merits, when you do something good to help others, especially in the case of bhikkhus, Buddhist monks, or supporting generosity, but also especially when you're practicing your sila, your virtue, and you're purifying your mind, you're practicing metta, you're generating merits, which you can choose to share with other beings. Now, there's the counterpart of this. When you do the opposite, what we call akusala, unwholesome actions. In that case, you are generating not merits, but fancy term would be demerits, unwholesome results, fruits of such actions. So for every action, there's a reaction, just like you learn in school with Newtonian physics, laws of Newton, right? For every action, there's an equal reaction. So when we're doing something wholesome, we get the reaction of that in the form of good merits. It's like somebody giving you a credit card with this much balance, credit you can use. But when you have a debt, that's where the unwholesome part comes in. You have to pay for that. There's no way you're going to get off the hook. That's why karma or kamma, you can forget about kamma, but kamma will never forget about you. It will catch up to you no matter where you go. Yeah, whether they see what you've done, wrong things, or not, whether somebody calls you or not, if you exist, it will reach you. Okay? So Kamma is always playing tag team. It will say, you're it, sooner or later. It's inescapable. You cannot escape Kamma so long as you're alive in a form, in existence. So what if that Kamma that comes, the reward, is a good thing, though? So that's why we also promote doing of good, right? That's smart. So the Buddha turns to King Pasenadi, who's now much more relaxed. And he says, so you mean to say I don't have to kill those people? He says, no, you don't. He says that was the dream that Brahmadatta had. Now, part of the Jataka is there was an ascetic living in the Himalayan mountains, which are, you can probably see on a clear day from where the Buddha was sitting. The Himalayas are the tallest mountains in the world. Hima Alaya, it means the house of snow. Hima means snow in Sanskrit. Alaya is the domain, or house of snow. So he says there was a yogi, it was an ascetic living in the mountains, and he was scanning the world and to see how he could help with his positive thoughts. But then he saw that King Brahmadatta was about to commit this terrible act. Not himself, but the priests were. Remember, the same thing that happened to Pasenadi had happened to King Brahmadatta. That's what the Jataka is saying. That's what Lord Buddha is saying to him. And he sees this, the yogi, and he quickly says, I have to do something. So he transports himself. When you are a meditator of that level, you can do what we call bilocation, or you just move your body in space and time. We have many, many, many examples of the Buddha doing this, as well as his senior disciples. So there's nothing, no magic involved. It's just the power of the mind. Now, don't go around asking bhikkhus like myself or others if we could do that. The answer would be no, in most cases. But there, anyhow, this is not that important. But anyhow, that yogi appears from top of one of the Himalayan mountains from his cave. He shows up in the kingdom, in the capital, but in a quiet area, because it's too much of a shock to go from silent dwelling to the middle of the city, into the middle of the city. So he sits there and he's sending out his vibes so that the right person comes along, because he came all the way there because he doesn't know the king, right? He doesn't know Brahmadatta, but he says, I'll come here and I'll try my best to help the situation so that those people could be saved, those animals could be saved, because this is wrong. No animal should be sacrificed for someone else's fear or something, but that's what we see, in people doing this to kind of avoid a tragedy or something. Meanwhile, they're causing more tragedy over there. What kind of a blessing is this? What kind of a sacrifice is this? So anyhow, the same thought is also happening in a young Brahmin who goes to his teacher, who happens to be one of the senior Brahmins who went to the king, King Brahmadatta in the story. And they told him, oh, we have to sacrifice the fourfold sacrifice. So one of the students of these senior Brahmins goes to his teacher, as the teacher is like, they're having, because they're so powerful, these priests, they have servants where they're saying, okay, dig over here, dig over there, make sure that's enough space for 4 elephants, make sure there's enough space. Are you getting the 4 people? Okay, get them here as soon as possible, wash them, because they need to be washed and cleaned before we kill them. So they're arranging all these things. Other Brahmins over there are setting up the tables for them to eat the meat, the fire, another Brahmin over there. So they're busy like a wedding, and they're celebrating already. So one of the young Brahmins goes and he says, but I don't feel comfortable about this, teacher, he says. He says, why? He says, but in our texts, there are things I've read where it's not condoned to spill the blood of other beings. We're Brahmins, he says, aren't we? Like, why are we called Brahmins? Because of Brahma. Brahma doesn't kill anyone. Why are we doing this? And he says, shh. Are you crazy? Don't tell anyone about this. Get lost. You don't want to participate? We are. Don't interfere with what the gods dictate. All right? And I am your instructor. I'm your teacher. You should obey me. Otherwise, off you go. So the person says, well, my heart is not okay with this. There's something wrong with this. So he's kind of, well, he's completely, shattered his faith and all that but he says, I have to follow my heart. I can't do this in clear conscience. I won't have the blood of these beings. So he goes where? Towards that park. And he sees this beautiful golden figure of a yogi sitting there in the middle on a rock. And he approaches him and he says, wow, Bante. And the man is the yogi from the mountains. And he says, what's happening? He says, oh, Bante, they're gonna kill, they're killing, they're about to kill beings. And he says, yes, I know. And he says, what happened? He says, the king saw a dream. And where in it, he heard these four voices. This is about Brahmadatta now. Same voices. He says, my young child, I can't speak to the king because I don't know him. You go and get the king over here. Now, because he was a famous Brahmin student, he had access to the court. The young Brahmin rushes to the king's court and convinces the king to come because he says, there's someone here that can really fix the problem, make your nightmares go away. And really, he's a saint, please. And the king, Maharaja, rushes to the park with the young Brahmin. And that is the place where the yogi tells the king the same thing as Lord Buddha was saying, that these are voices from four different beings, four men who are locked tightly in hell. And the king is shivering in realizing all this. And he's like, oh, what should I do? And he says, king, you must stop the sacrifices immediately. And he says, done. He sends word and the whole thing stops. And instead, there's a celebration because the king realizes that he had lustful thoughts of a woman. He wanted to engage in sexual acts with this woman that didn't belong to him, belonged to someone else. So this was interesting because usually the Jataka stories occur, the Lord Buddha talks about them, reveals them, unfolds them, because they have elements in them that resonate with something that happened in the past. But because the Buddha would have the memory to recall these events, he would call them out by name. So now King Pasenadi, in hearing this story in full, is happy and he's thanking Lord Buddha. And the Buddha says, by the way, that yogi was me. That yogi was me. And that young ascetic was, I think he says that Brahmadatta was you, the King Pasenadi. That tells you something, right? Because we don't learn sometimes. We have to be like pushed, like we have to be pointed at the thing, okay? Sometimes we repeat them from life to life, the same mistakes. So this is an interesting story because it helps us to focus on what we can, what we can't do. We have to be our own controller. There's nothing wrong with controlling. We do control all the time. Every time you say something, you're controlling what words come out. Whether you hum it, or you open your lips and you move your tongue, you move your teeth, your jaw, you move them in a certain way and different sounds come out. That's control. Where you look is also control. So control doesn't mean something bad. When you're riding your bicycle, when you're walking to a certain place, out of a place, or you're driving, you have control. If you don't, you're going to slam against a wall. So control isn't bad. Control is wonderful if and when we know what we're doing. Trying to control others, that's a problem. Terrible. Is my action in doing this, in trying to use my control over this thing, is it bringing happiness or is it bringing pain? Sometimes pain will come in some cases when you have, let's say, something stuck, a nail in your body. I remember when I was 12, I think, or 13. I was learning how to do, jewelry. I was an apprentice and learning the trade of jewelry making. And I was at that stage where I was finally being given pieces of gold to saw. In this case, I was sawing, and the the metal saw is so thin. It's almost like, well, thicker than a hair, human hair, but you use it like, against this thing that we call a tongue. It's made out of wood, so it's like a jeweler's goldsmith's station. So as I was too eager, as I was sawing this piece of gold flat, I had traced it, so I was trying to make something. I didn't move it well enough, fast enough, or too fast. I don't remember what the thing was, but basically it broke, and one of the pieces of the saw went into the joint of my thumb. So the blood was coming out, but not as much, but it was painful. Now I knew I couldn't keep it there. So we didn't have nurses or anything. So the other older people around me, I guess today would be called child abuse or child, what do you call it? Exploitation or something. But it wasn't. No one was exploiting me. I was paying money to go and learn a trade. So it wasn't a sweatshop or anything like that. So anyhow, they told me, oh, if you want, you can actually pull it with some pliers or something. And that's what I did. But I knew I had to go experience a little bit more pain. But it was going to be brief. I couldn't have that metal be stuck there, obviously. So I pulled it out and some blood came out, but I dreaded it before doing it, but I said, I have to do it. So I just like, nothing broke. And it came out, and I put a band-aid. I guess I have another band-aid on, but for another reason. I scraped it. But basically, sometimes pain is necessary, but sometimes. So we need to think about our actions when I'm doing something. Is this causing me at least pain? Not just now, but in the future as well. And very importantly, usually I like to say, is this action causing the other person pain? But we have to be, they go hand in hand actually. Am I causing you pain by saying this? But what's the cause? What's the reason? So is there metta in my doing this? Is it skillful? Is it kusala? Like I was saying earlier about merit-making actions. Is it based on Dhamma? Is it necessary? Is it helpful? All these things, the words that I'm saying to someone, sometimes you have to be harsh. Sometimes you have to be scolding someone. That's necessary. You can't always be soft and sweet, this and that. They will walk all over you. I know, I told you I was a high school and middle school teacher for 10 years plus. But that doesn't mean you need to crush the person. No, the individuality of the person, you have to help it to grow, for the person to find their voice, their beauty. However, if you let everyone go and do whatever they want, it's going to be a zoo, and that's what the world is. So control is necessary. Control is absolutely necessary, but how much that requires wisdom. For that, you need to associate with wise people, people who know better than you, people who have been around longer than you on this planet. That's why we go to school. That's why we need to study. That's why we need to study history. Learn how the brain works. Learn how to learn. At school, we're not taught that. Learning how to learn. We never taught that. They teach us algebra, geometry, things like that. That could be useful one day in a certain discipline. But how to relate to one another, with one another, that is never taught. how to be kind to yourself, to the world, to the environment, all these things. And that's what the Jatakas are trying to do also, to help you to get your focus back and to see what really matters. So with today's Jataka, the Pi, Jataka 314, with the 4 syllables, I don't like to call them mantras, but the 4 syllables fits it better. And the calls from hell, calls from hell. I guess that's one we could call this Jataka, even though the Pali name, I'll put it up there as well. So that'll be it for today. And yes, and may these sessions grow, and may they most importantly be useful to you and all your loved ones, and enhancing your life and giving you a sense of direction and control. We must have control over our lives, how you think, what you think. Okay? You can learn about other people's opinions, but ultimately you must take ownership of how you're thinking and fix whatever needs to be fixed. For that, you need to do healthy comparison. Is this bringing to me more pain? Not just now. I might be getting away with things like King Pasenadi. He knew he was going to get away with it. He could even send some people over and kill the man on the road. He's the king. He can get away with it. So we need to be responsible for our words, especially our thoughts. The Buddha always started with the mind. The mind, the words, speech, and the bodily action. Simply because others cannot know our thoughts does not mean that we are not breaking precept. That's why we practice meditation also, to control the mind, not be victims to whatever thought that pops into your head. King Pasenadi did not have control over his thoughts. That's why he let his imagination run wild, drag him into lustful thoughts. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't even eat when he came back from the elephant ride, because he was like, yeah, I wonder when I can have her. Meanwhile, he has hundreds of wives over there in his harem, plus the Queen Mallika, right? That's how terrible lust is. We always want more. That's tanha, as I was saying in the beginning. So see how much of it you can identify. And these sessions are there to support you. Okay? And that's what the Dhamma is there, to support us in our practice of living, training ourselves to live healthy, beautiful, pure lives, healthy lives, productive lives, and helpful to the whole world and each other. With that, Sukhi Hotu, until next time. May the blessings of the Triple Gem be with you and all your loved ones. Take care.